And while we wait, here's Jasmine and Patrick and Allison. So I'm so excited to speak with all of you today. And please, if you have any questions, feel free to put them in chat, and we'll be happy to answer. And so I'm just going to introduce myself quickly. I'm Marie Roker-Jones, co-founder, co-CEO of Essteem. And what we do is we organize hackathons that are social impact driven, and we help companies to bridge the gap between their good intentions and measurable and actionable ESG goals. And so responsible tech is part of what we do with every hackathon. We ensure that our community and the companies that are coming to sponsor are doing something that is moving us forward in being impactful and changing the world. So excited to speak with all three of you. So I am going to start the introduction, and I will start with Jasmine.
Hi everyone, my name is Jasmine. I am in third year of undergrad at the University of Toronto, and I am studying engineering science with a specialization in machine intelligence. My work in responsible tech is mainly focused in ethical AI, and just this year I founded EPI, which stands for the Ethical Principles in AI Student Group, and we are the first student group on campus that is dedicated to making ethical AI more accessible for all undergrad students. And I'm very excited and grateful to be here.
Thank you, Jasmine. And if you could please just put your LinkedIn in the chat so we can all connect with you. And next is Allison.
Hi, everyone, and thank you, Marie. My name's Allison, and I was formerly a middle school language arts teacher. I'm now doing my PhD in learning sciences, and my current work is kind of split between thinking about ethical use cases for some of the tools that we use in learning sciences, like effective computing and predictive modeling, but also from my instructional background, thinking about ways to really disseminate that information to a broader portion of the public and making sure that people working in the law systems and education and healthcare on the front lines facing people understand AI a little bit better and are able to, advocate for its ethical use in their jobs.
Great. Thank you so much, Allison. And can you please put your LinkedIn in the chat too so we can connect with you? And last but definitely not least, Patrick.
Hi everyone. So excited to be here. My name is Patrick Kalin. I'm in my final year of law school at Brooklyn Law School, and also author of a upcoming book, Machine See, Machine Do, that'll actually be released later this month. And yeah, a lot of my research interest and background is really in technology, law, and policy. I come from a little bit of a coding background, but a lot of my focus is really more on sort of the policy side of things, where a lot of my work is on data privacy, surveillance, as well as a lot of the algorithmic bias issues that we're seeing in the criminal justice system. And so that's the area that I focused on. A lot of where I've worked before in the past has been at organizations like the ACLU, For Humanity, as well as a law firm where they specialize in AI fairness and data privacy. And so that's sort of the angle that I'm coming from. But really excited to be here and so excited to share a bit about my experiences with the panelists here today.
Great. And Patrick, like everyone else, if you could put your LinkedIn in chat and also, the title of your book, since excited about that. And if Jasmine and Allison, if you have anything you'd like to share, please feel free to put those in the chat. So I wanted to start off with, because what I appreciate about this panel is we all are coming from different backgrounds, right? And Allison, middle school teacher, and I have a background in social impact, but not necessarily tech. And Jasmine and Patrick, you're coming from two different. Patrick, you're coming from law, and Jasmine, you're coming from engineering. So I think should be a really interesting and fun conversation, because we're all going to be able to offer different perspectives. And I guess my first question is, if you could do one thing to get more, and I don't want to say young people, but students, to think about getting into responsible tech, what would you say to them? Like, what conversation would you have if, and Jasmine, you're still in school, so for your peers, what would you say to them about responsible tech? So we'll start with you.
For me, I think what really got me into responsible tech was a course that I took in second year called Engineering and Society, where it introduced me to the concept of how like tech is not apolitical and all of the technology that we create as engineers have an impact on society, sometimes in ways that we don't anticipate. And so I guess to students, I mostly interact with other engineering students. I would just say to them to really think hard about all of the stakeholders involved with their designs and to recognize that, you know, it's really important to recognize that not all innovation is equal to progress and to really think twice about like any biases that they may have when they're designing tech.
Right. And I'm glad you brought up you brought up bias, because I think it's really important for us as humans, as people doing this work, to think about our own biases and how they show up in our work, and just to do a check-in. So glad you brought that up. Allison, I'm going to turn to you because you had a career shift, and I want to learn a little bit more, and I'm sure the students want to learn, how did you make that shift, and what compelled you to do that?
Sure. Thank you so much. And I'm just going to turn my camera off because I'm watching myself glitch in and out as I'm talking. So hopefully everyone can hear me okay. But that's a great question, because I think that my transition was not something that I had planned. And it really came about organically because when I did a few years teaching in public school. I live and work in Florida, which our districts and our educational systems here are large and very diverse. And so I thought a lot about equity, social justice in those roles. And as technology and the use of predictive modeling of student data, we're very assessment driven down here. As that kind of came into the playing field in education, that was really what helped me to be motivated to learn more about tech tools that I might not have otherwise engaged in, because I think it's important for people, within our disciplines to also be able to, like, I'm trying to kind of have a foot over within the technology side too, and be able to kind of communicate and bridge between the gaps of these two communities right now.
Yeah, thank you. And Patrick, can you give us some thoughts about if someone is in law school, perhaps, or thinking about law, but wants to also integrate responsible tech into their studies or their career path? What would you suggest, or what are your thoughts?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say don't discount the fact that you can still play a really big role without necessarily being directly in technology. I think engineers and programmers and software, designers, they all play a really, really extremely important role in actually creating and designing and developing the technology. But there's so many other spaces where you can also play a really important role in ensuring that that technology is used in a responsible, accountable, and ethical way. And something actually Jasmine said that I think is really, really key to sort of, I think, what's fueled a lot of my interest and understanding in this space is that technology is apolitical, is not apolitical, and that technology brings with it, a history and all these biases from people who have created it, and in the environment that it's drawing inspiration from, especially when using data from, law enforcement databases and things like that. And so, I think from a law perspective, the law is something that often can feel very antiquated and often fails to keep up, I think, with the times, right? And I think it's a space that has taken a very, very long time to develop and grow and progress. And that's where I think if you are in this space, if you're interested in the law, if you have any interest in technology, technology is growing and developing so quickly that I think it's a really interesting space to get into if you're interested in the law and policy. I think it's a space that is in sore need of regulation, making sure that we're using technology not just for the sake of automating and for efficiency gains, but also to actually improve, the human experience and society. And so I think lawyers and policymakers and lawmakers, I think there's a really great need for a better understanding of responsible technology. And so I think there's a really there's a space for you here to, I think, make a really big positive impact, because I think a lot of the biggest issues that we're facing today, technology is involved.
That's a great point. And I think it's interesting because when we do our hackathons, I'm not a technologist, so I'll share a little bit about my path. It was really being part of the veteran community and working with military families, and then seeing how when some of them tried to transition into tech, the struggles that they had, and wanting to look at tech through the eyes of like, how can we create more equitable, work environments for people that come from different fields or different backgrounds and experiences, and how do we think about what we're building and who's impacted by what we built. And Patrick, you kind of led the way in what you were mentioning about new things that are happening in tech. And right now we're hearing so much about blockchain and crypto and NFT, and there's so much confusion, and there's so many. Some people are weary of it, some people are excited, and so as we start to think about where we're moving, and especially with Web 3.0 and Facebook is now Meta, what I'll ask each of you, what are you most excited about in regards to responsible tech? Because we're hearing all about this great stuff that's happening, but there's very little conversation about how we're going to incorporate ethics and how we're going to think about what we're building, particularly as we move forward, and who's going to be left behind too. So whoever wants to start, feel free to chime in. Patrick, you look excited to speak, so I'll call on you.
Sure, I'll jump in first. I was hesitant to speak just because I had spoken just so recently, but
Yeah.
yeah, I think something that has really been on my radar lately is sort of this. I think I'm going to say two things. First is, I think with the New York City bias audit shift, I'm really excited about. I think even if it's starting off at the local level, I think a greater interest and awareness of scrutinizing the way that algorithms are used beyond just the public space. I think the way that AI is being used for things like hiring tools or making decisions about where a student ends up after taking a standardized test when they're going to a high school, for example. I think those decisions have a really profound impact on the human experience and on people and their communities. And if we're not really, really critical about the way that those algorithms are designed, I think we lose out on this opportunity to address, I think, bias on a really grand scale. And so I'm really excited about sort of this change, I think, in a lot of, especially at the local level of governments, I think, caring more about how do we make sure that technology is being incorporated in a way that will actually benefit people, and at the very least is not inflicting harm on people. And so I think that's one space where I'm really interested in. But I think also just I think also in the private space, I think there's also greater focus at how do we look at small and medium enterprises, and how do we provide them with sort of more risk assessments, especially for, again, things like AI hiring tools, um, financial institutions using algorithms to make decisions about loans and credit card approvals and things like that. Um, Again, things that have really profound impacts, and I don't think are really scrutinized enough, and certainly the public is not aware of how they're being evaluated. And I think there is a lot of movement in the private space to really, I think, put these technologies and algorithms under the microscope a bit more. And I think the more the public is aware, I think the better off they'll be. And so I think those are two spaces that I'm really interested in.
Yeah, thanks. How about you, Allison?
Absolutely, yeah, and I'm going to piggyback off of that because that really kind of ties in with what my answer to the question would be, which is just that it's really exciting for me to see the public discourse shifting to where more people are kind of, I guess, becoming aware that these tools are not, these inherently objective answers to the complicated questions and decision making things that we have to do professionally in places like law enforcement and in education. And so I think for me, what I'm looking most forward to is kind of being a part of the research and the design on what it looks like to educate a citizenry, like, students within the public school system in the United States? What does it look like to redefine digital literacy to be able to meet the needs of today's technology climate? Because right now, the way that we teach about technology is often very insular, which is kind of reflective of how we see it, in technology spaces now for people that are developing tools and things like that. So I think for me, what's really exciting is getting to write about and discuss projects that would allow for the development of curricula, of teacher education trainings and programmings, and just really redefining what it means for somebody to be, well prepared to enter a society where technology is going to be interwoven into everything that they do, and not just kind of like this computer science elective that they can take if they're already interested in that. So I think this discourse that we're doing now and all these spaces that we've created, and making technology accessible to people that, you don't need to know about the algorithms in a really in-depth way. You don't need to be able to write your own code to be able to have an opinion on how your data is used, or to be able to understand the impacts of technology in society and have an opinion, or, participate in a debate on the ethics of that. So I think that those kinds of conversations now are what I'm seeing, and I get to be a part of those spaces where I wouldn't have been invited to be a part of those spaces before. So that's been really exciting.
Great. No, thank you, Allison. And Jasmine, and before you start, Jasmine, I just want to let our audience and viewers, if you have a question, please feel free to put it in chat, because this is for you, and we want to ensure that we're answering your questions and getting you the information you need. So Jasmine, thank you.
I'm not sure I have much more to add on top of what Patrick and Allison have already said, but I think one thing that I've noticed as a student in undergrad is that definitely I see an increase in like education, for me at least, of about responsible tech. And I'm also really excited to see a lot of the research happening at the University of Toronto that's related to ethical AI and responsible tech in general. So yeah, like I suppose an example would be we have a new ethics in AI lab, or perhaps not new, and then it's just really cool to be able to see a lot of the research align with responsible tech and be able to access those resources as a student.
Great, thank you. So I'll wait for some questions to come in, but before, as they do, I saw that Jason Valdez wrote something that digital literacy is seriously lacking for a lot of people who do not study or work in this space. And I wanted to, if one of you or all three of you want to touch on that a bit. And I think Allison, you had brought up about digital literacy. So if you want to comment or.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, because I think for me, so as somebody who thinks about education, I've worked, in different instructional roles and I've worked in a STEM nonprofit in my area previously, where I was connecting the resources from local STEM companies and leaders to our districts. So I think that is really the biggest hurdle that I see moving forward, is that for those of us that are not actively engaging in this and seeking it out, and I think that Jason also mentioned this, this is not mandatory education right now. When I work in higher ed, so we think about kind of this general studies plan that every student needs to be working on civic literacy before they can graduate. There are required courses in English and math. And so I think for me, what's going to be really important moving forward, and, I think of in my work, what would I want my kids to have? What do I want them to walk away with? Because that's what I want to do and provide for everybody. But, so I think for me, it's at least some kind of mandatory, technology in society course, or, computer sciences courses, something that is accessible and inclusive, and that you do not have to have a heavy tech background, but that is just enough to expose, undergraduate students into what it's going to look like to apply to a job in this current market and potentially have, to deal with an algorithm that might not treat your resume fairly based on your name or demographic information that it pulls from you, or ensuring that students as they go through K through 12 have, developmentally appropriate opportunities to learn about the tools that they're using, the way that their data is being utilized within the school to make decisions about their pathways and their tracks for where they're going. And, that extends to parents too, because I think foundationally, when we don't know what these tools are, and especially in education where we're so underfunded, overwhelmed, everybody's, doing more than their fair share, it's very easy and attractive for leadership in those spaces to say, oh, okay, we'll buy this third-party tool and this will solve our problems. And, without that digital literacy, you make yourselves vulnerable. And in education, when we as leaders make ourselves vulnerable and we lack that critical digital literacy or the technology skills and wherewithal, we also put students at risk. In law, you put, vulnerable populations within the prison system at risk. In medicine, you put patients and people that are critically ill at risk. So I think for me, digital literacy is going to be the next wave of what is so critically important. And what I'm really passionate about is just alerting everyone, like, this is not something that the people in tech are dealing with. This is an everybody issue. This is an everybody topic. And here's why I think that you should care about this and how it impacts your life. Because I think if we work to do that in a more thoughtful way, in a more inclusive way, accessible way, where people feel empowered to have these discussions and ask questions, I think the more that we do that, that people will start to kind of give pushback and ask, like, okay, why is my child tracked this way, and is this assessment really valid? So that's what I'm hoping digital literacy will become, is something that's just more inclusive for all of us.
Thank you so much, Allison. And Sheldon shared a resource on free digital literacy courses, and as well as Tristan. So if you are wondering, they're in the chat. Jasmine or Patrick, did you want to add anything? Any comments before I get into some of the questions?
Yeah, actually, Marie, if I could just jump in really quick on the tech and digital literacy piece of it. I agree with everything Allison's saying. I think those are all really important things, and I think there needs to be better integration of tech literacy, especially at the earlier stages of an individual's education. Something that I still think about is actually something my high school English teacher told me way back when, is that as a writer or creator, it is your responsibility to make sure that what you are creating is understandable for the general audience. If there's someone who doesn't understand what you are trying to communicate in an essay or in art or whatever it might be, that is on you as the creator of that content. And I think we need to think about technology in the same way. I think some of the most interesting and most sort of innovative ideas in this space are oftentimes written for just within our own communities, right? Technology, I think, like law in a lot of ways, can be really unapproachable for most people who aren't already in that space or have that background. And I think until we are in a space where there's a more, I think, meaningful effort to incorporate technology literacy in education, I think it's oftentimes on us, I think, to actually make sure that we are making these technology in these spaces more accessible and more approachable for more people. Because I think the more aware of, I think, the benefits and the harms of technology people are, the general public is aware, I think the better off we'll all be, because then we'll have more people being able to engage with these conversations and be able to share their opinions and their thoughts on how to make these innovations, I think, better for their communities. So I think until that happens, I think it's really on us to do that.
Thank you, Patrick. Did you have anything to add, Jasmine? Or
I'm not sure I have anything more to add on top of that.
no problem. So one of the questions was posted by Niall, and one of the panelists, I think Patrick, said technology is neither good nor bad. It's neutral. What then makes some technologies harmful to society. Maybe use automation and its negative public perception as an example. So whoever wants to go, Allison, Jasmine, Patrick.
I can like have a quick comment on like whether technology is neutral. I think like, and I feel like today we've been talking a lot about the more recent technology and the hot topics such as ethical AI or algorithms. But an example that I learned in class recently was even technologies such as bridges can have political and societal implications. And so I'm in Toronto, so this is just like I've heard of this, but I haven't witnessed this myself. But apparently, the overhead passes are very low around New York, and the reason for that is because the civil engineer and designers at the time didn't want buses to go through because they didn't want poorer people to access the parks that would be connected by the highways. And so that's a way that technology can actually be bad when designers and engineers have these intentions of trying to exclude specific stakeholders. Another example would be seatbelts in cars. I think it was discovered a couple years ago that they're a lot less effective for women and for shorter people, and that women are way more likely to be seriously injured or killed in car crashes, even wearing their seatbelts. And that's because I believe they're called dummy testers. They were all like modeled after taller men, and so the specifications and like the seatbelt specifications weren't actually considering women. And so that's another example of how technology can, unintentionally be bad for specific groups of stakeholders.
No, great. Thank you for those examples. I mean, it's important for us to be reminded of how if people are not thinking or not living the experience of who they're designing for, they're going to omit a lot of people. So, Allison, Patrick?
Yeah, I really like the example Jasmine gave about Robert Moses. He was one who designed the bridges in around Long Island. And he very famously said, because at the time he actually first created legislation to prevent a lot of public transit, like public buses, from using highways leading to the parks around the more suburban areas surrounding New York. But he very famously said legislation can one day be changed, but it's really difficult to tear down a bridge once it's up. And I think we're seeing that again. I think this an analog between older technology and newer technology, where I think we are implementing AI and algorithms across the board, and it's becoming more and more sort of embedded in our day-to-day lives. But we haven't really taken the time to, I think, step on the brakes a little bit and see, like, okay, is this really something that we want to be leaving to an automated decision system? Should there still be a human in the loop? Should we still be having people still involved in that process, especially for things like we're using algorithms now to even make decisions about whether someone should go to jail before trial, how long someone's sentence should be, making decisions about where police should be going in different neighborhoods. And I don't think we've taken enough time to really evaluate whether those are decisions that should be left to designers and to technology, and whether communities want that. And so I think, like the quote from Robert Moses, right? Bridges are a lot more difficult to tear down once they're up. I think once we have this, unethical and potentially harmful technology so embedded in our lives that it's difficult to remove after a certain point, and a lot more difficult, I think, to really, I think, scrutinize and be critical of. I think, like, what will we do then, right? And so I think now is a really, really pivotal time to, I think, really evaluate the way that technology is being integrated in different parts of our lives, and do more before, I think, those bridges are up and we can't really do much about it.
Great, thank you. I don't know if you wanted to add anything, Allison?
I think that they both put it so eloquently, and I agree with those points.
All right, thank you. I wanted to touch on, and I'll get to another question in the chat, because our previous two speakers talked about the importance of building your network, your professional network, and wanted to hear from each of you, particularly when you're a student and you're not yet in the professional space. what are some ways you can build up your network in this field, in responsible tech? What's some advice you'd give to some of the students?
I think I don't know that I have great advice because I'm still in the thick of it. I think, changing and trying to have this very interdisciplinary focus now and trying to kind of express the value of my experience within the educational system has been challenging for me. But I really, appreciated earlier when our first speaker said, just invite yourself to the party. So that's what I'm always doing, is just kind of crashing things and asking for forgiveness and not permission, and trying to be open and very transparent about my background, and just trying to find people who have a willingness to share and do the same. And it's been positive. There are a lot of spaces or interactions that can feel kind of disheartening, or you feel as though, being outside of like a very traditional computer science background, it can be very daunting. So I think just being very humble for me and being willing to cold email people and not worry about that has been very positive and has gotten me, into a lot of great spaces and to make some meaningful connections.
Sure. Jasmine, do you have any tips?
I think a specific tip that I've been using is just like, I think while you're still a student, people are very receptive to you and they're a lot more willing to help you, I think. And so for me, I really like to reach out to university faculty and alumni even who are in this space, just to let them know that I'm interested, and ask them any questions or advice that I may be wanting. And I think that's, a really good first step, especially as a student, because like while you're a student, these are the resources that you have available to you. And, maybe after you graduate, you won't have these resources anymore. So it's good to take advantage of them while you still have them.
Patrick?
Yeah, I mean, I think everything that Alice and Jasmine have said is really key. I think especially reaching out to professors while they're still so accessible, and really don't discount the power of cold emailing or cold messaging someone. Um, I think especially at a point where you're still learning, I think enthusiasm and humility can go a really, really long way. I think I've certainly reached out to people that I didn't think would ever give me the time of day, because of all the interesting work they do and how important they are. And I think if you express how enthusiastic and passionate you are about this space, show that you've done your homework, show that you've looked into what work that they've done, and come at it from, listen, I'm very new to this space. I'm really interested and I want to learn from you because you're so well established. I think coming at it from that angle, a lot of people are really receptive and want to be able to welcome you and bring you into this space. Because I think this, this responsible and accountable technology world that we're building, I think it's a space that's always looking to bring in more people and to bring in more voices. And so I think coming at it from, again, I think really letting your enthusiasm and humility show through, people will be really, really excited to welcome you and will have these conversations with you and share their work and their passion with you.
Great. Yeah. And I'm going to add to that because I've been in this field and working professionally for more years, that everything that they've said, be authentic when you're reaching out to people, particularly on LinkedIn, as Patrick mentioned. Do the homework, find out who they are. Great way to do that is attend events like this, and then just send a LinkedIn message with maybe something that stood out for you or asking a question to the speakers. And then you have All Tech is Human. You have this space right now that you can network and meet other people. So please do take advantage of the opportunity or sign up to be a university ambassador for All Tech is Human. So there's so many ways you can connect and get in front of people. So but make sure it's authentic and you're presenting your best self. I did see another question. Some of these questions are more geared around your thoughts on data privacy. And I do want to ask these questions, but because this space is really for breaking into responsible tech, I want to stay aligned with this title and what we're talking about. So the next question I have is really centered around what what have you learned, about yourself? What have you learned about this responsible tech space that you would like to share with others and or get them involved in? So
I'll go ahead and start us out. I think the biggest thing that I learned coming into a degree in learning sciences and using the advanced learning technologies that we do, thinking about data science, and I say this, like embarrassingly, one of the big aha moments for me was that tech is not inherently objective, because working in the field that I work in education, you really, one of the earlier speakers talked about it being within a black box. And that's very much the experience in many of these human facing professions, where we're asked to do a lot. And this is just the way that you do it. It's so ingrained within the system, within our evaluations, the way that we evaluate students, that you're kind of just going through it and you don't even have a second to catch your breath and question the ethics of that. So I think it took me stepping away from those roles, getting back into graduate school and doing my doctorate now, that I get to really reflect and think about all of the different use cases, some of the specific and broader level ethical concerns. I saw there was a comment earlier about Google Classrooms, like for each specific area, like law and public policy, but especially like in education, that would be a great specific concern about. We don't think about that when we are, making our plans for the school year or trying to meet the needs of students. You're just doing. So now Google Classrooms is already integrated. And as Patrick was mentioning, and Jasmine, you can't undo that as easily. We're dependent on that now. And, for students within public school systems, that's mandatory. You are by law required to be within that classroom, to utilize those technology schools, to finish, your grade, your year, to graduate with your high school diploma, what have you. And so it really, really takes away the decision making for a lot of people, and prevents people from making or advocating for themselves in general, and those kinds of spaces when maybe you're sick or you have are dealing with legal issues. So I think for me, my biggest aha moment was just realizing that tech tools are not these kinds of things, churning in the background that we just use and move in and out of. They are human created, and they are only as good as the data and the efforts that we put into them. And that because of that, subjectivity, even though those empowered really like the kind of granularity that it provides and the quantitative output that it provides, and we get to talk about our reports and our data results and things like that. So I think that just realizing that there needs to be a greater public awareness to the limitations of those tools, and creating a more cyclical discourse where people can have an input and developers can hear that and respond back to that. So I think that has been my biggest takeaway for the past few years.
Great. Jasmine?
Yeah, so I haven't been in the responsible tech space for as long, so I think my takeaway is going to be a little smaller. But to build off of what Allison said about how tech can be very subjective, I think the main takeaway that I have is to always approach creating technology from like a mindset of having sympathy for all of the stakeholders, and of course always checking my own biases whenever I am making or helping create technology. And I think that's really important for all engineering students, especially those that are going to enter into the tech pipeline and are going to contribute to the creation of a lot of technologies that will become integrated into society.
Thank you. Patrick?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think Jasmine and Allison really already said a lot of the things that I wanted to say too, and I agree with everything that they've said. I think two other things I would add here is like tech solutionism is something that you have to always keep in check. Um, and progress can always be faster than it should be. And so I think coming from the the law and technology space, I've recently worked on litigation, for example, where a hospital is still using an algorithm that has a binary yes or no for whether an individual is black or not black, and that's the only variable that they use, and it's used for things like determining whether someone should get a kidney transplant or not, for example. Um, it's a very, very old algorithm. A lot of hospitals actually still use it, and I don't think the public knows about it, right? And it wasn't until this particular patient found out that this was something that was affecting whether he would be able to receive a kidney transplant. That's sort of why this litigation came about. But I think we need to really think about how we're using technology, and as much as technology has progressed, as much as I think we have improved, and progressed as a society and as humanity, we can always be doing better. And I think it's important to not get complacent and to always question and to always demand that we do more and we do better for not just ourselves, but for the community at large, and make sure that the technology is doing the same thing. Because at the end of the day, the technology is just a reflection of our own priorities, right? And so making sure that we are codifying the right things and not asking technology to do things that are punitive and harmful for humanity.
Great. Thank you. And so, for the sake of time, I want to just ask one question, and if we can keep the responses to 1 minute. And is there anything that we haven't addressed that you think, and I know that's kind of hard to answer in a minute, that you'd like to just share with the students? And then also, if you could just leave one resource in the comments so that you can share with students. So I always pick you last. I want to start with Patrick. What's one thing we haven't addressed that you think students can explore and dive deeper into?
Sure. I think with respect to, I think, thinking about sort of what students are looking for and how they can sort of set themselves up for success, I think don't undermine the value of your own personal projects. I think a lot of times we chase after titles or positions that will make us look more impressive, or credentials that really bolster what we contribute to a conversation. But if there's certain areas that you are especially interested in, and whether it's finding a space that is best for expressing that interest, don't discount the fact that you can also create your own projects, do your own research, publish papers for yourself, and that's a really great way to not only build your own knowledge, but to also share like a really personal passion project with the world as well. And so even if it's not like a formal initiative, or it's not affiliated with a large company or with a particular institution, I think doing these projects on your own and sharing it with people and reaching out to experts and getting their thoughts on it, I think that's a really great way to connect with people, but to also just build up yourself without being, I think, constrained to the agendas and motivations of different institutions. You can do it really for yourself. So even if it's not formally tied to something, it can still be really meaningful.
Great. Allison?
I think overall, my biggest advice is to not allow other opinions or perspectives to make you feel as though your kind of attention to ethics is inherently negative or cynical, or kind of in some way in conflict with growth or moving forward. So I think especially in education, when you start to piece things through and talk about education in the particulars, when you get up against that and you're talking about tech or data usage, there can be a lot of pushback that you're just kind of like, being a naysayer for the sake of being a naysayer, and that it's kind of this unpopular opinion in certain spaces. So I think my biggest advice, and something that I'm trying to do myself, is just to be very mindful of being super honest and authentic and as humble as I can be, and still kind of standing in my views and my values, and trying to get into this field of ethical and responsible tech and have that be something that drives my ability to care for others, because that's kind of at the core of what I've done professionally and what I'm trying to do now as a student. And so to not let, I guess, different opinions sway you from your beliefs that this is important work, because there are definitely strong voices that don't feel that this is in the best interest of ongoing development and tech advances.
Great, thank you. And Jasmine?
I think I definitely agree with what Allison said about anticipating pushback and also knowing what to do with the criticism. But I think the most common criticism I've gotten is that responsible tech can impede progress, but I think it's quite the opposite, as I think this entire panel talk has established. I think responsible tech is really about pushing for better technology, and that is what progress is all about. And so I definitely think, anticipating pushback is important. And also building on what Patrick said about doing individual projects, I think also, if you're a student, getting involved in student groups can be a really good idea, because especially if you're really busy, it can be nice to have a community of other students who are kind of working towards the same goal as you. And it's lower time commitment while still being able to be in the responsible tech area.
Thank you, Jasmine, Allison, and Patrick, for being here with me today. And thank you for joining our panel. Please connect with our panelists on LinkedIn, and feel free to, if you have, read the comments, our panelists, to just, if there's something that wasn't answered, please do take the time to do that. And thank you, David, and for having us today. And enjoy the rest of your day, everyone. Bye.